Hey everybody, so this is, excuse me, our next lesson, composition of functions. So our last lesson, it was specifically where we were plugging a number in. Today we're going to focus on plugging in x's. All right, so again, the composition of function is actually the fifth operation. It's when you substitute a function into another function. And we use this small the small circle represents composition. And that just means f of g of x. So the second one goes inside of the first one. So g goes inside of f. All right, so let's do a review of what we did before the break. So we have our in and we have our out. So our inside function and our outside function. So the inside is this g of x, and the outside is f of x. So I'm going to find g of -1. Plug that in. I get, 1 minus 8 minus 9. So that's -16. I'm going to take that and plug that into f. So 9 minus 2 times -16. 9 plus 32 is 41. So that's your final answer. And then over here, my in is f. So now we're going to do f of -1 equals, 9 plus 2 is 11. And I'm going to plug that into my out. So then g of 11, 121. Plus 88 minus 9, 121 plus 79, that's 200. That's the answer. So order is very, very important when you're doing composition of functions. You do not get the same number both times. Excuse me. Oh. All right. So basically when you're thinking about substitution, composition, you're thinking of substitution. So this is f of g of x, right? The second one, it's left to right. So we're going to put g of x inside of f. So f is 5x plus 2, and I'm plugging g of x into this. So just like substitution from Algebra 1, -7x plus 4 plus 2. So I get -35x plus 20 plus 2. So f of g of x is -35x plus 22. So let's do the same thing, but with the opposite. So now g of f of x. What just happened? Did I move this thing? All right. So g is -7x plus 4. I'm substituting in f of x here. So we get -7 times 5x plus 2 plus 4. -35x minus 14 plus 4. So g of f of x equals -35x minus 10. So they're pretty similar because they're both lines. And if you think about the domain and range, since they are lines, domain and range are going to be all real numbers, So that is something we don't have to worry about with this. Okay, so pause the video and I want to see if you can figure these out, at least the basic substitution part. So we have f of g of x. So what I do is I start with the outside, that's my f, and I'm going to write it with parentheses. And then what am I plugging in there? 2x plus 1. 2x plus 1. FOIL that out, multiply it out. It is not 4x squared plus 1. Don't lose our silly rules just because we're learning at home. Oops, that's an x. 3x minus 3. So we get 4x squared plus x minus 2. So that is the function. And then I'm going to do the other version. So we have g of f of x. So this time we're starting with g, which is 2 times something plus 1. X squared minus 3 goes on the inside. 2x squared minus 6 plus 1. 2x squared minus 5. Okay, so now, if you think about the domain and range of these, the domain for both of these is all real numbers. The domain for the original functions is all real numbers. However, the range for g of x, the range of this is all real numbers. The range of this is you have to complete the square, you have to figure out your vertex point, right? So it's going to be from whatever, x minus 1.5 squared negative 1.5 squared, negative 2.25 to infinity. So the domain, the range of this is that, but for both of these, the range is going to be different. So that's something that you have to think about, and we have to restrict, we have to talk about how the range is going to change and could affect the functions. All right, little harder. Again, the process is the same. It's just I'm just making the algebra harder for you. So why don't you pause the video and try these two. All right, so we have f, which is the square root of 3x minus 7. And in that is x minus 7 over x plus 5. So this is gross. All right. I'm going to try to write this a little nicer. So 3x minus 7 over x plus 5. I'm going to try to turn this into, have a common denominator. So x plus 5, x. So we end up getting, let's see if I can do this in my head. Oh no. So we FOIL and we get 3x minus 7. Let's see, that's minus 5. That's a minus. So that's minus 12. The square root of 3x minus 7 plus 35. So that's if we FOIL the top. And then we FOIL the bottom. 3x minus 7 minus 25. So let's simplify that. I get 3x minus 12 root 3x minus 7 plus 28 all over 3x minus 32. Yikes. So that's pretty disgusting of a problem. I mean, it's just algebra. It's the algebra that makes it hard, but that's the process here if you wanted to rationalize the denominator. I'm sorry, this is so messy and gross. Okay, so this is where we're talking about the domain and range. So if we're starting with, we start with the inside, right? So we start with the domain of G. We're plugging in the domain of G. When you plug G in, and then that turns into the range. But the range has to be the same as the domain of F. The range of G, what we get out of G, is then being plugged in to the domain of F. So that's really kind of a tricky thing. So for example, if my G of X was a square root, and my F of X was, say, X plus 9. So really basic function. I only get positive numbers out of this, right? I'm only, the range of this is 0 to infinity. But, so that means when I'm plugging into F, that's going to have an effect on the range of F. So my domain, because my domain is restricted to this, my range is going to be restricted. So the smallest number I can get out of here is 9, right? If I plug in 0. So this is 9 to infinity, the range. So it kind of, depending on the function, you really need to think about what are you plugging in, what are you getting out? Then what are you plugging in, what are you getting out? Because they have to overlap, right? So the domain of the F is not allowed to just be all real numbers. It has to be the 0 to infinity because we're doing this composition. All right, sorry for the writing on this one. I had a mistake. All right, so now we're going to list our points, f of g of x. So remember, we're starting with the domain of g. Right? So f of g of x. And I'm going to start with, we have that bracket. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to write down all the x's that we're starting with. So we have 7, 2, 0, and -1. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through. So we need to find g of 7. G of 7 is -1. So now this is the y value, but then it turns into the x value. So now up here, the x value -1 is 0. So I had actually a mistake, so it's 0. So now go to 2. 2 has the y value 3. Go up to the outside function, 3 gives me a 2, so 2, 2. 0, so g of 0 is 5. Go up top, that 5 now becomes my x value. F of 5 is -1. And then -1 is here, we get -8, go up top, -8 gives me 7. So that is our function. All right, pause the video and try the reverse. All right, so for this one, we get, let's see, f is -8, 3, 5, and -1. Hopefully this works. All right, -8 gives me 7. Down here, 7 gives me -1. 3 gives me 2. 2 gives me 3. 5 gives me -1. -1 gives me -8. And -1 gives me 0. 0 gives me 5. That's it. That's the function. I don't know. These are just fun. And that's it. Have a fabulous day, guys.